Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CNF Talks, where I have the pleasure of speaking to some of the speakers from our upcoming events. Today, I have with me Isabel Simpson and Rose Amin, who are partners at Clyde & Co., both of whom are going to be speaking at our Data, AI and the Future of Financial Services Summit in London on the 16th of March. Welcome, Isabel and Rose.
Thanks, Maurice. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you with us. Let's turn to our first question. And I think this is for you, Isabel, to address, isn't it? How would you describe the UK government's approach to regulation of AI in the financial services sector? And how does the approach here in the UK differ from that in other jurisdictions?
This is a really interesting area because we are seeing a global rise in AI laws, and in the UK we've also seen an increasing amount of guidance being released from the different regulators. And within the UK there have been different perspectives to balance here between those who are really looking to concentrate on the benefits of AI and those who are really concerned, and rightly so, about the risk that using AI exposes us to. And there have been different voices within the UK government and also within the House of Lords opining on this, and many of the listeners will be aware that there remains a draft AI bill in play. But my impression is that there continues to be a very strong message from the UK government that the UK should be a leader in innovation, in technology and in AI. And one of the ways it's going to achieve that is by continuing to take a sector-led, principles-based approach to regulating AI rather than implementing a new AI-specific law, which some other countries have done. And that might seem strange to organisations who are new in this area or who have less developed or mature compliance models, but actually in a highly regulated industry, such as financial services, whilst AI may introduce new risks, in essence, this is really another technology risk, and we already have laws in place which regulate how we should be using AI. And what the regulators are looking to do is they are looking to produce guidance which addresses the new risks that AI brings to us.
And how do you see that, just to explore that further, in comparison to the EU AI Act? What do you think are the sort of pros and cons of the UK's approach versus that very prescriptive approach of the EU?
The EU has taken an approach, as you say, that is prescriptive, and they are really looking at it from almost like in a product liability sense. So they are asking organisations to risk assess the use of the AI, and there are obligations on those who have created the AI. There are different obligations on those who are using the AI, and it is very prescriptive in nature. Arguably, though, the AI Act is not the only law that organisations in Europe need to think about. They also need to think about all of the different laws which are already in place as well, and that includes the laws that we have in the UK, or that we have that are very similar in the UK around health and safety, around data protection law, around financial services regulation, intellectual property. There are lots of different things to consider. So what the European model is looking to do is to be more prescriptive, which I think some organisations find very, very helpful. But the UK is looking to really strike that balance and promote innovation.
And just broadening it out from the sort of regulatory approach, what are the principal legal and governance risks around AI?
It's a broad question, and I think it is worth reminding listeners of the legislation that we already have in place, which governs the use of AI. But first, I think it would be worth highlighting a couple of areas that listeners should consider. The first is AI dependency, and that is where organisations embed AI into their system to such an extent that they cannot perform without it, and they don't quite know where it is. That is a huge operational resilience issue, and if you don't have a human in the loop, then that dependency can move AI from being an enabler being used to drive efficiency within the organization to being a decision maker. And that is something that, in my view, AI shouldn't be. AI is an enabler. It is not a decision maker. It should just enable decision making.
Yeah.
With that in mind, in the UK, we do have a number of existing laws, a couple of which I mentioned earlier. So data protection, employment laws, consumer laws, competition laws, equality legislation, intellectual property considerations, online safety considerations. There are a huge amount. And I think where organizations are struggling is actually pulling all of those together and creating one compliance framework. And what organizations do need to consider when they are thinking about governance and about that framework is this is not a brand new risk. This is technology that has increased risks associated with it. But these are not, they shouldn't be starting from scratch. They should be uplifting the compliance model that they had in place when it came to procurement of technology already, rather than looking at AI in silo.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose, but one of the big risks, isn't it, is the reliance on third-party vendors and the sorts of main contractual and commercial risks when drafting those sorts of agreements for procuring AI systems, particularly with, say, the FCA's focus on that exposure to third-party suppliers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the biggest risk really in that area is that organizations really need to understand what they are buying. So we are seeing an increased risk in what's called AI washing. So AI washing is where organizations say that they are using AI or that the technology is AI when in fact it isn't. So when organizations are procuring AI, they really need to understand whether it is AI that they are procuring or whether it is just another piece of software. And that's quite difficult when we are working in an environment where AI, quite frankly, is fashionable. And attaching AI to absolutely everything is becoming increasingly fashionable. And that comes with a lot of risk. And we're seeing that. We've seen it in Europe. We've seen a number of cases over in the US. And no doubt we will see that in the UK as well, where organizations claim to be using AI when in fact they aren't. So understanding what you are buying and the solution that it is meant to be giving your organization is incredibly important.
And I guess that there's a sort of asymmetry in bargaining power to some extent, isn't there, between very, very large tech companies and their customers who are taking on their systems, which perhaps increases some of that risk. But perhaps we can explore that a bit further. Rose, I think you were going to tell us a little bit more about the litigation risks arising from AI usage. And I suppose that litigation may be part of that vendor-customer relationship, but it's also customers and staff and wider society. But what are the main litigation risks?
Yeah, that's a great question, Maurice. And it's really an extension of the really helpful points that Isabel made, namely that AI is meant to be this enabler and not decision maker, but inevitably, when it becomes a decision maker, and perhaps an organization like banks or financial institutions aren't fully locked in or dialed into understanding that, they can become responsible for that automated decision making. So for example, in an employment context, if you employ AI algorithms to review CVs for potential candidates, and there might be inherent bias, you might not even be aware that those algorithms have biases. As you say, Maurice, there's this dependency on a supply chain, and the lack of visibility means you inherit any potential errors or biases. And that may result in potential employees, candidates, making claims against employers for algorithmic bias because there is that automated decision making. So to Isabel's point earlier, that human oversight is really important, and failure to do so can create those litigation risks that they may not have fully anticipated. Another area that I think will be really interesting for financial institutions is the use of AI to, on one hand, innovate and improve customer service, to bring speed and expediency in the customer experience, for instance, by use of a chatbot. But the question again is, should you be liable for what a chatbot is? Now, there have been cases out there, particularly in Canada, in by way of example, an airline being held by a small claims tribunal to be liable for the incorrect and misrepresentation by a chatbot, which gave wrong advice, and it was forced to pick up the costs of that customer. Now imagine if that chatbot gave incorrect advice to 30,000 customers. Would an employer or an organization be expected to pick up all of those costs? And that's a clear litigation risk, and perhaps is no different to a product liability claim. At the end of the day, a chatbot using AI technology is another form of a product that is being utilized to enhance customer service. But again, if there isn't great visibility, it can create another litigation risk for an organization. And of course, as you picked up on, Maurice, there's the contractual elements of the intricate web of different parts of the supply chain, whether depending on a third party and then the supplier, because there is an issue of different responsibilities and obligation and what rights you may have, commercial or otherwise, that can really expose an organization to contractual liability if there are flashpoints or failures to deliver service reliably.
Yeah, there's so many risks, aren't there? I mean, one of the things I wonder about is agentic AI, and when you have autonomous agents going out, performing all sorts of tasks and taking decisions, admittedly set within the parameters of the agentic AI software, but nonetheless taking decisions, and the litigation possibilities from that must be pretty large, I'd imagine.
Exactly, and I think a key issue is it's important to first identify who owns the risk. When you deploy technology, agentic AI or any other form of LM model, and someone holds you liable for any algorithmic bias or any other issue, who owns that risk? What do the contractual agreements say? Now in the EU, we have the EU AI Act that prescribes where responsibility sits, where ownership should be, and the enforcement action and penalties that may follow if one falls afoul of those prescriptive measures. But there is no such structure in the UK. And so it's really important when you adopt these measures and technologies that evolve over time and take autonomous decision making, who's ultimately responsible? The person who provided you with that technology, or the person adopting that technology and executing it?
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, AI will change the cyber threat landscape immensely, but both in terms of attacks and their sophistication, and potentially, I suppose, also the plus side on their defenses. But how do you think the financial institutions should assess this particular risk?
No, that's a great question. And as much as it is a helpful tool in that it can improve sort of security and perimeter testing of IT infrastructure, which may have previously been static, it can evolve into something that's dynamic because you have AI software. You no longer need someone looking at a 24/7 SOC screen to be able to pick up on red flags 24/7. It can be automated, and that's a good thing for financial institutions. But equally, the threats are becoming sophisticated, and the scalability of the sort of attacks, particularly scamming and encouraging customers for payment diversion frauds, that's happening more frequently, and the ability to trick people into handing over money is becoming very sophisticated. And an example of that is AI deepfake frauds. And CEOs, CFOs, and senior officials especially, or just pretending to be a bank and tricking customers into handing over money, that's going to be something we're seeing more and more, not just in the form of video deepfake frauds, but also audio deepfakes. And we've seen this in the form of threat actors sending WhatsApp audio messages, trying to put pressure on individuals to hand over money. And I think it's really important for banks, financial institutions, and customers to really have the framework to ensure they guard against such attacks and threat actor tactics.
So, overall, whilst it presents so many huge opportunities for productivity and growth for individual corporations and the economy, there are huge risks associated with it as well. Given everything that you both said, which you really shed some light on these issues, what's your advice about what financial institutions should be doing now?
So from my perspective, Maurice, I think it's really about education. So whilst us lawyers know what laws are out there and what organizations should be doing. Actually, the people that are really important are the people who are using the AI and want to use it day to day as an enabler. And so really organizations need to do their best to educate their people about what they should be doing, what they shouldn't be doing, what the risks are, and also the opportunities as well.
And from my perspective, Maurice, I think, as I said earlier, identifying where the risk sits and understanding who's responsible for it will give clarity to financial institutions as to how and where they need to tackle these risks. But in relation to those cyber threats, it's important to acknowledge that these are not going anywhere, and it's a board level issue. And the AI threats that are going to be accompanying cyber attackers means that resilience and preparedness is key. And I've sat down with financial institutions and run the cyber preparedness workshops, and it's always such a fascinating learning experience for the C-suite, for people in HR, for people in the legal team. And the key takeaway is that each part of the organization and business really needs to be dialed in, coordinated, and ready to be able to triage and deal with an issue that is going to likely cripple the business if a cyber threat were to occur. So preparedness is key.
Thank you both for that. And for our viewers, if you'd like to hear more on this subject, do have a look at our website, www.cityandfinancial.com, for the details of the Data, AI and the Future of Financial Services Summit, which is being held in London on the 16th of March. We very much hope that you, our viewers, will be able to join us. Just remains for me to say thank you so much, Isabel and Rose, for your time today. Looking forward to seeing you on the 16th.
Thanks, Maurice.
Thank you.